I think we're live.
We're live.
I don't think we need volume.
We're live.
So we're live. We're live and in person and live. This is Two Guys, One Book. We are discussing, as you know, the principles for dealing with the changing world order by Ray Dalio. It is May 21st, 2023. We're in the middle of the U.S. Civil War. Just kidding. But we are discussing the things that may lead to the U.S. Civil War in the near future, as Ray Dalio lays out in the chapter we are discussing today, Chapter 5, The Big Cycle of Internal Order and Disorder. And I think this is a pretty relevant chapter. I don't know. You don't really even need to read the news all that much if you're kind of just like generally just talking to people around you. There's a pretty big feeling, I feel like, in the U.S. that we're at a crossroads right now. And we'll get into later in Ray Dalio's model of, internal order and disorder, which is, it's kind of vague, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
But I would say in summary, it's kind of like what we're going to be talking about here is kind of how the people within a self-governing entity, I think it's the term we agreed upon.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an empire, but a self-governing entity like the U.S. or China or the Ottoman Empire or the Roman Empire. How the people that are governed by that governed entity interact with each other and interact with their leaders from an economic standpoint, a social standpoint, an education standpoint, a political standpoint. It's like it's a really like big picture overview.
A big umbrella, a lot of things under it.
But
we got our guest star. But yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting chapter. Looking at, I mean, most of these topics, as we're going to see, are directly relatable to periods of time. The 6 stages, very, very applicable to different parts of the kind of life cycle that has been the United States and also just global civilization. So it'd be really interesting to get into kind of where we are now, what's next for us, and kind of just comparing where we're at to previous, as we said, self-governing entities, over time that, I've had the same sort of telltale factors and what kind of happened with them. So,
yeah. So we're going to get started by kind of going over Ray Dalio's kind of model of how he goes and thinks about internal order and disorder of like the people within some sort of self-governing entity. So to get started, we're going to look at the 6 stages of the internal cycle, is what Ray Dalio refers to it. And if you flip to page 152, we get a high-level overview of what this cycle looks like. And it's important to call it a cycle because stage 6 kind of leads to stage 1, and stage 1 leads through 2, 3, 4, 5, then back to 6. Doesn't look the same every time, but I think it is a good model to like model this as a cycle. History repeats itself, so it's pretty obvious to me that like the rest of this book, like the patterns that we see throughout history and the various aspects of our society, just the people interacting through. I think Ray Dalio kind of looks at wealth and power mostly in this chapter. And kind of some influential factors over those things.
Right. I think the easiest example, though, without even getting into the stages, would be, like, talking about the cycle, would be Rome, rise, fall. What's that? The Byzantines, rise, fall, and then Ottomans, rise, fall, and it was all the same region. So it's like it was 3 empires in the span of however many centuries that was. But they all rose and fell, and then no one rose, the other one fell. Then the Ottomans came in, that fell, and then it became Turkey, which is still the Ottoman people. But then that rose. I don't know really where that's at now. I don't really know too much about Turkey, but it's just interesting to think about.
It is interesting, and that makes me think about my favorite book of the Bible, the book of Daniel, which discusses 4 empires, and the 3 of which I think are the most relevant, because the first one is the Babylonian Empire, which I don't know, we don't talk about a whole lot in this book, but the Babylonian Empire, which is replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire. And so that kind of represents maybe like, a cycle, a major cycle shift of this internal order or disorder. But over the course of these individual empires, we do see multiple like cycles of this internal and disorder cycle, right?
Yeah.
And then, before the Romans were the Greeks, which replaced the Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah, because it was the Persians, and the Persians got taken over by Alexander, and like the Macedonians were taken by the Greeks, and then the Romans, and the Byzantines, and the Turks. And then it's an interesting cycle. But that region is also very interesting because there's never, like in the United States, for North America, there's never a serious example of this cycle, because that region is very known for being very old and having a lot of civilization.
Yeah. Versus
here, where it's like, we have older civilizations, but they've been very much hunter-gatherer. It hasn't been as developed as we have now. It's like this is like stage 1 of 1.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's been anything before that's led to this, but
it'd be hard to argue. I think that the I guess I'll say the Native American to modern American, because the Native Americans definitely were an empire. Like they had power over certain regions, but they seemed like their own self-governing entities.
They were local. Yeah, it was like a lot of local self-governing entities. I would say they had control over the region, but they were constantly at war with one another. There was a lot of sticky stuff. They never. That's the kind of the biggest downfall of them. They were never able to unify. Because if they were able to unify, they might be able to stand up at least to the Westerners, but they never did. Because they were never able to unify. So it was a very fractured landscape.
But I mean, even though it's not a very clear transition, these oh, I think I have to join the call. You want to send me the link?
Yeah.
Even though that wasn't a very clear transition as the Greeks to the Romans, for example, the Medo or the internal order and disorder does get influenced by external entities, as we learn about in stage 6. Stage 6 is when there are civil wars or revolutions. Just send me an invite, is it email or something? Could be. Interesting. Why don't you just text me the link? Sorry, you're gonna have to. We're gonna go through these technical difficulties, but we don't edit our videos, and I hope y'all respect that. Because we're trying to be as truthful and honest with each other and everyone else who listens.
We also don't have a Jamie character to fix these.
J-Mo.
All right.
I'll get in the meeting soon. Just copy and paste the link and text it to me. But anyway, let's go through the 6 stages.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're reading from page 152, the 6 stages. Stage 1, when the new order begins and the new leadership consolidates power, which leads to stage 2, when the resource allocation systems, so getting energy, getting food, getting water, when the resource allocation systems and government bureaucracies are built and refined, which, if done well, leads to stage 3, when there is peace and prosperity, which leads to, I'll let you take care of stage 4, 5, 6, while I join the meeting.
So after the peace and prosperity stage, we're led to our period of kind of materialistic, endeavors, where there's just a lot of spending, debt widening, and the expansion of wealth and political gaps, so like income inequality, political people being arguing about what's conservative versus liberal or whatever whatever it's been over time, which then is going to obviously lead to some bad financial conditions and intense conflict, which is stage 5. And we'll talk about it more. It's kind of where Ray Dalio is pointing that we are at now, and we're in agreement there. And then finally, stage 6, civil wars and revolutions, which then would bring us right back to the stage 1 where the new order begins, and we go back through that cycle. So,
yeah. And so this cycle, as we discussed, are like, even though it is an internal order and disorder cycle, like how, individuals within the self-governing entity interact with each other and the leadership and stuff like that, these are influenced by external powers, right? Mm-hmm. So like, you can look at, I don't know, the American Revolution. Like the American Revolution, which, as I'm sure you know, was like, not everyone in America, all the colonies, like wanted to necessarily move away from the British.
Right.
And so that was kind of the internal order and disorder. Like the leadership, like, I don't know, the most influential people, I guess, of the society, of the colonial government entity, wanted to take America a certain direction. And then obviously the British stepped in,
right,
and were like, no, you can't, we like your resources, you provide a lot of money and stuff like that. And the British had a lot of influence over like the thoughts of people in that time in the American Revolution, like how they interacted with each other. I'm sure a lot of propaganda was going around from the British.
Oh yeah.
But then a lot of propaganda from the leaders, if you want to look at it that way, like no taxation without representation. Like that was a talking point that was spread with a specific agenda in mind. And I don't know the precise definition of propaganda, but
there was a lot of propaganda, because that's when they were really using the printing press. And there was the I think it was Thomas Paine, Common Sense. What was that? Yeah, that was a big one, right? And then we had just the actual Articles of Confederation, that sort of thing. I think there was a lot of propaganda around that period. But I was just thinking, honestly, I would argue there've been several. So I was thinking back about talking about how there was no example of stage 1 up until the United States was founded, but I think that we've gone through these stages several times already.
100%.
Like, because I was thinking about the Civil War that we already had. There was already great excesses in wealth and political gaps because there was the whole slave thing, right? And then there are people in the South who were poor Southerners, and you had, people in the North who were kind of more in industry, and then then you look at it also World War II. After World War II, we got into a great prosperity era, and then people started spending more. And then we have the Civil Rights Movement, which I think could count and classify as a revolution. It was, in a lot of ways. So I think that it also led to a new period of a new order, where now we're incorporating and assimilating colored people and people of different ethnic backgrounds into the greater American kind of culture landscape, So I think we've already gone through these stages several times already.
Yeah. I think so too. And I believe Ray Dalio would agree with you on there. I'm not sure. Are you able to zoom in on?
I think I pinned
on this.
I can unpin this.
Yeah. I'd like to look at this graph while we're talking about, the US specifically going through multiple stages of this cycle. Like, this is a graph that Ray Dalio published. I'll try and zoom in here on it. But like, this is just over the last 100 years or so, a little bit over 100 years. And Ray Dalio, this is just looking at the US, looking at kind of I guess our financial order specifically, and how it influences the internal order and disorder, like class conflict. You think about the communist revolution, that was completely centered around economic class conflict.
Yeah.
So I think the US went through that in the Great Depression.
Oh yeah.
I'm not exactly sure. I wish I was a little bit more brushed up, but are you familiar with who was in power, like leading up to the Great Depression, and like maybe who took over power? Was there a big like political shift?
I think it was Coolidge, but he was a Republican, I want to say. And then I think the big thing that came out of the Great Depression was obviously FDR, and now the government sponsoring of like social welfare programs. That was the main thing. So the New Deal, talking about creating jobs, the foundation of Social Security.
I would say central bank probably contributed to this as well. I know this is a little bit before, 1913 is a little bit before when, 35 when Ray Dalio identifies this. But I mean, you could see like, this is like 1913 right here, right after the central bank collapse or was established. We had some, I guess debt that was released, or
Right.
not non-financial debt. I don't know.
I think that might have come from also the war.
Yeah.
Like all the expenditure of having to like give stuff to Europe and to Western Europe. I think that came from that too. But yeah, I mean, it was a big period where we pivoted from being a very individualistic sort of state where everyone kind of has to deal with things on their own to becoming now the government has power to basically provide things for people, which was a good step at the time, but then a lot of those items remained in play for arguably too long.
Yeah.
So
yeah, maybe got taken advantage of by some people.
Because then they were like, well, we can't get rid of it now. Now people need Social Security. Now people need, which I think Social Security is a good thing, but I mean, it's not that big of an amount of your taxes that go towards it. I think it's a good program, but there was a lot of other social welfare things that kind of just remained for a little too long when it wasn't really needed. And I mean, example two is the same thing happened in COVID, right? I mean, like we got too many of these social incentive programs just kind of stayed put for too long. I mean, and it's just like it doesn't really help anything. It helps in the moment, but then afterwards you got to cut those programs.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I totally agree. And there's a lot of signs like interest rate changes and I guess monetary base here that when the country goes through hard times, like these factors are like signs of that internal order disorder changing. So this document we're looking at here, by the way, is just a outline kind of that ChatGPT helped me create, and Izzy and I, we're kind of brainstorming here, looking at what we're going to talk about, stuff like that. But so we're going to try and publish this like in the description or whatever. So if you want to look at this, you're welcome to. The outline at the top of the document was actually based on posts that Ray Dalio published on LinkedIn, and just plugged into ChatGPT and made a few edits here and there, but it provides a pretty good outline of the chapter we're looking at. Why don't we go to page 156 and look at the other kind of external factors that influence this internal order disorder cycle? Are there any of these that like stick out to you?
Say Meiji Restoration for sure. Great Depression is Meiji Restoration, for context, for those who don't know, is Japan post being opened up by the United States and Teddy Roosevelt in his time. Essentially what it was is Japan realized later on, I think it was the early 1900s, I can't put my finger on where, but they basically identified, hey, we are behind the rest of the world when it comes to industrialization. We're behind when it comes to manufacturing. We need to do something that is unheard of, which is basically transforming our country from an agrarian state to an industrialized country in a span of like 30 years. And it was actually absurd because they reformed everything socially, and they just said, we're going to flip a switch here. Like, no more of this traditional. We're going to keep our traditional stuff, but we're going to kind of compartmentalize it, and we're going to promote growth and innovation, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then that led to, oh, we also need to build up our military. And then the military ended up becoming its own kind of separate entity that kind of operated outside of the country and did its own things. And then you had domination of Eastern Asia and then World War II inevitably. But it was Meiji Restoration was very important because, I mean, that was the first example. It was honestly really impressive that a country was able to transform itself from basically third world to first world in a matter of like 25, 30 years. Like, that's insane. Like, that's crazy. No other country's been able to ever do that. I mean, it's partially because it has a smaller population and it has more of a homogenous society, so people are more willing to, and culturally, it's a very interesting place where people generally operate by the norm. But a lot of free thinking and stuff was very much stifled. It was very much like what the country wants, we need to serve and we need to do. So that's pretty important. Roaring 20 is very important because as we were talking about the stages, that was a great excess in spending. And then what do we get the next decade? Oh, the Great Depression. So, so the Roaring 20s was a great period of time in America, but then next thing you know, you got a huge recession period and you're like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Social programs. And then we ended up going to war, and war is also one of the biggest stimuli to the economy.
Yeah.
War is big. War always helps generally.
What I want to point out, though, is like when you're talking about the Meiji Restoration, like this is in, I want to say stage 6, but like, was the Meiji Restoration necessarily like, was there physical conflict
within Japan? No. I mean, there were like stifling of free thinking and stuff like that, but there wasn't like any. Japan's never really, I mean, the whole point, there was conflict leading up to it. Because Japan used to be just warring states. It was like a feudal society.
Military, farmers, artisans, and merchants, like 4 classes. Is that kind of?
And I think it was the Meiji Restoration is more of a consolidation of those things, because up until that point, I know samurai were typically the military people, but then it shifted from, oh, these are soldiers to, oh, now samurai also need to be looking at art, and they needed to be able to be a writer and a thinker and a scholar and these things. So it pretty much integrated all of these separate groups into kind of a more modern version of what we're doing here. And that kind of like ended all the war and all of like the conflict. They kind of united Japan into one country as opposed to like a feudal system.
So that kind of took Japan from stage 5 through stage 6 back to stage 1. But there wasn't necessarily like a major civil war like the American Civil War.
No. They just had a lot of wars up until that point with each other. But I mean, I think that pretty much the Meiji Restoration brought them back to number 1. The founding of the new order. They had the new order. They worked, and people spent a lot. It was a great society. Things were going very well. And then all of a sudden, then they ended up having World War II, where the military basically got out of control, and then they got reset forcefully back with the U.S.-made Constitution to stage 1.
Yeah. And so like you mentioned, the Great Depression is a good example of like the U.S. going through, I don't know, like a stage 5, stage 6, back to stage 1 that, there definitely wasn't, like, I would say there was even less conflict, like physical conflict. Maybe there were protests and there were runs on the bank, and I imagine there were like protests and people couldn't get their money and stuff like that. But I think the point I'm trying to paint here is, and what Ray Dalio also points out on page 182, is stage 5 is a juncture in which one path could lead to civil war or revolution, and the other could lead to a peaceful and ideally prosperous coexistence, where it's like, you still have to navigate this like values gap, economic gap, stuff like that, but it doesn't have to be through war. And that's a great point to put out there. It's kind of like hopeful for me, and I hope anyone else that thinks the U.S. is in stage 5 and kind of has a lot of potential for civil war. That we don't necessarily need to go through a civil war or like have a bunch of physical conflict to navigate the situation we're in right now successfully and lead to a new like internal order that like accommodates everyone's needs and like values
Right.
successfully. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, because I mean, like you said, I mean, Japan, that didn't happen. You know, they never fought each other to lead to that major restoration. Like, I mean, it was just a take over the country, and they were like, and everyone was like, okay, we're on board. You know, we're gonna change things up, and that's what happened. And after World War II, the same thing happened. They were like, oh well. I mean, it also helps that they got nuked twice, so that's definitely enough to convince the population to change their ways. But then what? I mean, the people. It was no civil war. They weren't like, no, we need to stay at war. They were like, okay, like we'll adopt this new way of doing things. So I think it just depends on also the flexibility of the people in the country. Because I mean, Japan is kind of known also for being very unique in that they're very they have best interests of country and nation at mind at all times. You know, I think the United States has that, but I think it's less so than in prior, times. So I don't know. It's kind of apples and oranges, but it is a hopeful thought that there is a non-violent way to go about kind of reforming our current problems. As a country.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, like one of the most important factors, maybe that I don't know that Ray Dalio goes on in this about. It probably falls under the umbrella of like a values gap, but if there's like no values gap between like recognizing that like people are going to be people, we make mistakes, we are ignorant in a lot of ways. I'm definitely in that category in a lot of ways, but like if like the values gap, there isn't a values gap in that like you can everyone can come to terms with, okay, yeah, we just want to live peacefully and like I guess live comfortably. I like the first world that we're in where we have like hot running water or cold running water on tap for like not a bad price. I pay like 12-15 bucks a month for water, and I use a good bit of water. I drink a lot of water. I shower.
It's drinkable too, at least like where it's not like you're not getting water out of the tap that's like brown. It's drinkable water.
Clean water
for the most of the country.
And just being able to say, yeah, we all want food on the table. We all want to go to the grocery store, or go to like some sort of common place and be able to peacefully like go get something as basic as food. That's a nice thing to have. I think if we can all come to agreement on that somehow, I think a lot of that it comes from our leadership. Can our leadership just help us go back to the basics of like differentiating between things like needs and desires, right? To like, I don't know, help us navigate a situation like this. What do you think? You want to jump into maybe I would say maybe this is the climax of the conversation.
Yeah.
Stage 5.
Let's talk about it.
Stage 5. I mean, I think we have a very largely US based audience right now. And I think everyone is kind of interested in the world to see, okay, how is the US going to navigate the situation we're in? Because right now, as Ray Dalio has pointed out in like this whole book, like the US right now is kind of the leader of the world order. And so depending on how we navigate our situation right now, that's going to be kind of the determining factor for, okay, what does the world look like in the near future?
Right.
So stage 5 comes out of stage 4, which is a period of excesses, decadence. Ray Dalio puts decadence at stage 5, but stage 5 is when there are bad financial conditions and intense conflict. And like we said, intense conflict doesn't look like civil war all the time, but it does look like riots in the streets. Saw that during COVID, which we also see on Ray Dalio's graph on page 156. But
it also says You can also see page 167. You can also see that these different conditions are big drivers of the differences in what is now happening to most aspects of these countries, states, cities, companies, and people. Example, their education, healthcare, infrastructure, well-being. You can also see big cultural differences in how countries approach their stressful situations, with some approaching them more harmoniously than others who are more inclined to fight. And I think that kind of brings us to that whole conversation about I feel like the United States is historically more of a fighting country than it is a harmonious country. I mean, like Japan is more of a harmonious country than it is fighting. So it's it's interesting because I mean, those riots and the protests and everything, I mean, we've always almost promoted not necessarily violence, but kind of standing up forcefully for what you believe in, as opposed to kind of just letting things happen.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it is possible to have a nonviolent revolution here.
I'd say it's certainly difficult because if, the Western nations like the U.S. is very individual focused compared to Eastern nations like Japan, who successfully navigated this crisis like this, stage 5 to stage 6 to stage 1 transition without conflict, because they're concerned with the health and the well-being of the nation, which ultimately propagates down to the individual rather than the individual, which in the U.S. is a common belief system. I think the health of the individuals and the well-being of the individuals in mass lead to the health of the nation.
Right.
It's kind of two different ways of thinking.
Well, I think it's two different. It's like different ideologies. I think it stems from Confucianism and kind of having first priority is family, then essentially at that point it's nation. It's it's kind of like a breakdown of responsibilities as opposed to the United States, where it's very individual to family to community. It's just a big roll up, and then faith maybe, and then nations last.
Yeah.
Which is I mean, it leads to a lot of good, and also leads to people not ever agreeing about anything.
Yeah.
And always thinking that their ideals and their things are what everybody should abide by. And it's sometimes there's a need for commonplace and having hey, we want our country's best interests in mind, as no matter what we do, at least we have that common thread. We're proud of our country, promote the well-being of our country. That's it. All other kind of factors are out the door.
Yeah. And honestly, I hope a lot of the people in the U.S. feel that way. I certainly I want the U.S. to thrive. I like our country. I like the laws. I like living in the U.S. as it is today, even though there is a lot of conflict and a lot of inequality. But I think we should maybe answer the question: why does Ray Dalio think we're in stage 5, and maybe why do we think we're in stage 5? And I think a good segue into answering that question is on page 168, this classic toxic mix. The classic toxic mix of forces that brings about big internal conflicts consists of the internal country, or the country and the people in the country or state or city being in bad financial shape. For example, having big debt and non-debt obligations. Number 2, large income, wealth, and values gap within that entity. And 3, a severely negative economic shock. So number 1, bad financial shape, having big debt and non-debt obligations. I think that's pretty obvious if you look at U.S. national debt, and maybe our main export is the U.S. dollar. That's a little insane.
I think even beyond that, I mean, on an individual level, I mean, people don't save in the United States, and it's been a pretty bad problem for quite some time now. But I mean, savings is really poor. People are generally leveraging financing and debt in order to kind of gain. We were kind of talking about it before we recorded, but kind of leveraging debt as opposed to using it as an investment. You're investing money that you're borrowing into something that's going to have a return that you can actually use, and it could increase productivity or whatever.
Yeah.
Instead, it's using it for materialism and using debt to actually finance, instead of the necessities, you're financing wants versus needs. So I think that's another big part of it. Like when you actually look at the average person's bank account, I'm sure it's not looking great in the United States. And I couldn't tell you how much they're saving, but it's not good compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah. I wonder if that has to do with like the monetary base, kind of like up here. I don't know. Or maybe the monetary base is like an inverse of saving, perhaps. I've been trying to figure out I think we were both trying to figure out what the hell is this monetary base. I'm not exactly sure, but you bring up a good point, like the materialism stuff.
Yeah.
Like the values gap doesn't even have to exist between person to person, which I do think it does.
Yeah.
But the values gap can even just exist between like reality, like what is truly best for a financial entity's well-being, like that reality, and then what people are actually doing. Right. So when you think about like investors trying to get rich, like, okay, yeah, it's good to earn money, but like you said, it's if you're not going to use that money in the right way, that debt that was used, like the leverage and stuff like that was used to get rich quickly, if that isn't being used to be like reinvested into, like concrete things with like real value that will produce value, then there's a problem there,
Yeah. And I think honestly, like going as simple as like a car and a house, that provides value. You have value out of it. But when you use debt to buy, I don't know, you go into debt to buy some stupid, like, I don't know, you're trying to leverage your debt, you take a loan out to just buy a bunch of crypto. Like, it's like, okay, like, I mean, yeah, you get some value, but like, what do you, like, get something that has proven value. Like, don't be, what are you doing spending on? And it kind of plays into number 2 about the income gaps, because it's like, what I find so absurd is you got people, these social media people who are doing amazing for themselves, like Kim Kardashian, these people making millions of dollars. Like the money they have is absurd. Then you have people who are everyday working people, not that much money. They work a 9 to 5, they work 40-hour weeks at a restaurant, whatever, and then they put their hard-earned money into buying a product that this person that they follow is advertising, and you're literally just feeding, you're paying this person money. They don't need your money at all, but you decide that you're spending your money instead of doing like, hey, let me save 10% of it, throw it into a house, buy a little something here, you maybe save it for a family. No, like you're literally you're feeding into this inequality, because you're saying, oh my gosh, these people I follow so much and I need to buy their products and whatever. They don't give a damn about you.
I think that's a perfect example. It's like if a TikTok influencer was advertising like a designer face lotion. Like, face lotion is good. Like you don't want an ugly face, because that'll prevent you from getting a job and stuff like that. And I'm not saying people who are ugly with ugly faces can't get jobs, but it's like if you're going and spending 10 times the amount on your face lotion because of the name, then just because someone you like is advertising this thing that provides like marginally more value, like real value, like moisturizing your face, keeping your skin in good condition, to say, oh yeah, I use this face lotion that Kim Kardashian promotes, so you can get like some sort of like arbitrary social standing that like I don't know. It's like it's a bad cycle.
It's a bad thing. I think it's just kind of leading into the delusion of why people in the country don't have much money and they're in bad financial shape, quote unquote. It's because there's this delusion with credit lines and things. And I'll speak from personal experience, like I remember when I got the Amex Gold, I was like, no credit limit? That's crazy. I can spend whatever I want, because it's like, oh, it's not real money. It's just a card with no limit. And it's like, I think that there's a big delusion of social standing. I think what is promoting this inequality is the people who have money don't want to be spending their money. But somebody who doesn't have money thinks, oh my gosh, but I got these credit lines and stuff like that. I have money. And then you make purchases and you behave in a manner that is outside of your actual wealth standing. So then you get into more debt, and the next thing you know, you're basically living a life that you can't afford. And that's what I think most Americans are doing. If you like to, by and large, who's in debt versus what they're earning, I would say more people are in debt than they are earning.
You know, the problem is like people actually promote this behavior in maps. Like the song that like reminds me of this, I was thinking of a song, Rock Star by Nickelback.
Oh yeah.
Everyone wants to be a big rock star. I mean, like what? Like big houses and driving 15 cars. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, it's good to have a house. It's good to have a roof over your head so you can like, have some place to go and mentally recharge and, be out of the elements and like live another day. And it's good to have a car to, get from place to place and go like get like be able to take advantage of opportunities that, you wouldn't be able to otherwise if you're just walking or biking. But it's like, okay, yeah, you're buying a mansion that's like you can't use all of that space. It's just money that's not being put to work, and you're driving 15 cars, or it's like you can't drive every car.
Yeah, it's absurd. it's like you're not a rock star, right? Like it's like you have to understand that like you take things in stride. You're not Kim Kardashian. You're not gonna be Kim Kardashian. I'm sorry, like it's not gonna happen. It's like just you have your financial situation, you got the job you're working, you have the family that you have or don't have that you're supporting, and then that's it. Like you have to make smart financial decisions, and I think it comes from just financial literacy. I think that there's not enough when it comes to education. I don't think there's near enough in the public education sector or K-12 talking about financial literacy whatsoever. And people are clueless. I know even for me, and I'm a finance major, and I started working. I'm like, what the hell do I do with all this money? Like, it's absurd. Like, you don't know, and it's like expecting for people to be wise with their money. It's foolish. Like, you need to provide not services, or you don't give people money. You say, here, this is what you're earning. This is how we spend it. This is how and the services are available. There's so much stuff available. That's just people don't use it. And then we get into a place where we are now. We're probably 80% of the country's in debt. So,
it's like I think we should move on from this TikTok and Rockstar thing. But the last thing I want to say on it is it's honestly messed up that like Hollywood and like TikTok, like major TikTok influencers are using their platforms to like influence people to even want to be like that in the first place, spending their money unwisely. It leads to a bad individual circumstance in a lot of cases when taking on unnecessary debt and not putting it to work and not like using it to provide for your needs and desires are good to provide for as well. Like it is. But it's like, I don't know, romanticizing that kind of stuff is kind of a part of that values gap where it's like, it's not even between the person to person that causes the conflict and the fighting, but it's like, it's between the person, their ideas, and reality.
Right.
You can't live in a fake reality that just isn't according to the truth without like suffering consequences.
Yeah.
I want to hit on point 3, a severe negative economic shock.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the things that's like a huge indicator of like the fact that the U.S. is actually in stage 5.
Yeah.
There's, as we were discussing before we started recording, there's a lot of talk on the grapevine, from the Fed and, from, the sources I listen to, like, I don't know, like Glenn Beck and I listen to a lot of Bible prophecy that try and relates Bible prophecy to current events, and all those people I'm hearing from are saying like, yeah, we're about to go into some economic trouble here.
Yeah.
Just like it's potentially even worse than 2008 and potentially even worse than the Great Depression. And I think these graphs Ray Dalio provides like speak to that as well. You know, like Great Depression was in like the 20s and 30s or whatever. And here we go. Yeah, we got this circle right here, and we got, 2008 falling into this circle, and now here we are in 2020. Lots of talk about a recession, like a financially inspired recession. And it's just like, I think we're in for a severe negative economic shock.
Especially if we remain in Ukraine, because it also talks about an economic shock can also come from wars. So I think that Ukraine's not really helping anything, pouring money instead of kind of like building up safety nets while we have the time. Instead, it's because we all know that a recession was coming since COVID. We knew it was just bound to happen. Yeah. But it's how can you prepare for it? And instead, they're like, oh no, we're going to invest all this money overseas in this war, and it's like, we're not making any money from this war. We're only spending it. So it's like, what are we gaining here? Like, we're not even protecting our own people and like kind of safeguarding them from the impending. We know that a lot of people are going to really suffer with this recession. So it's like, why not provide like kind of what FDR did in the Great Depression? Like start already preemptively creating some sort of job services, creating these sorts of things that are ready to safeguard people. Instead, we're just pouring this money anywhere else, and it's like, no, it's coming.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is like creating safeguards that's like going to lead to productive behaviors.
Yes,
it's like we don't want to be handing out free money. Like I think free money is a good thing to be doing, like handing it out in hard times. We want to be doing that. We don't want to see anyone living on the street. We don't want to see people like jobless and homeless, you know, but like having some basic requirements around handouts, like, okay, yeah, show us evidence that you're applying to 10 jobs a month,
right?
Show us evidence that you're trying to re-enter productive society. So like these handouts, taking in debt to hand out money is actually going to lead to productive behavior.
Yeah, it's like the investment we were talking about earlier, like using that debt finance capital basically to turn around and leverage a new endeavor and actually make something out of it instead of just using it just like, oh, I need to buy a car real bad. Like, that shouldn't come from the government, unless it's solid. There's something that you are also providing.
I don't think there's a lot of incentive for our leaders to provide, like, I guess, provide handouts that lead to productive behavior, because we are the global reserve currency. It's so easy for the Fed and the central bank to just like print money, and it's so easy for politicians to be like, oh yeah, here's free money, so they get more votes. Because it's like what we were talking about, or I think one of the factors of stage 5 is like looking at short-term gain over long-term gain, and as I'm sure like many people are aware, like in order to like invest your money, invest your time in the long, like things with long-term benefits, like getting like taking advantage of like compound interest, like work over time is one of the most powerful things, but it comes at the cost of like you gotta sacrifice now to benefit later, and if you try and benefit now, then you're not going to receive nearly as much benefit over time as if you just sacrifice some of those benefits now to receive that like bigger benefit later.
I think it's also interesting how it talks about those places, page 170, those places, cities, states, and countries that have the largest wealth gaps, the largest debts, and the worst declines of incomes are most likely to have the greatest conflicts. And one of the examples was Chicago. I thought that was interesting because Chicago's already seeing a bunch of conflict. And then San Francisco's got like a crazy homeless population. New York has always been pretty bad when it comes to income inequality, but I feel like the city of New York has always kind of operated very differently. And I think that generally their police system has been pretty good over the years. They've got a pretty centralized police force, so they got things more under wraps than I feel like the other two places do. But still quite interesting to see that they are the ones like Chicago's. I mean, South Side versus other places in Chicago, North Chicago. You got people who are damn near millionaires, and you got people who are living on food stamps right down there. So it's quite interesting that they're also having all this violence and all this riots and police stuff. It's just it makes sense. I mean, it tracks, right?
It makes it, yeah, it tracks just because it makes people resentful, of the people who, a lot of times did play by the rules. To they made sacrifices early in their lives, and it led to that compound benefit where in their 40s, 50s, 60s, where it's I mean, they are millionaires. They do have a nice house, and they are able to easily provide for their families, put food on the table, and they do have enough money to spend on frivolous things, even though we just, as we discussed, not it's not good for the society as a whole to be doing that too much.
Right.
But there's a lot of influences like Nickelback, Kim Kardashian that make those people who did put in the sacrifices at the beginning and reap the benefit at the end, that make those kinds of people spend their money a little too frivolously.
Right.
And I don't know. I kind of want to read what decadence is in Ray Dalio's point of view, because that is one of his.
But real quick before we get there, there's this other little piece on that same page that was talking about it was talking about pretty much when the haves realize that they will be taxed to pay for debt service and to reduce deficits, they typically leave, causing the hollowing out process. And we've already kind of seen that with all these people leaving industry in California and leaving New York and leaving these big, whether it's a financial position or you're working in tech. And this is shifting now to the more economically conservative South, where specifically Texas, going to Austin, Dallas, Houston, these are now hubs for tech. Finance is only growing there. I mean, Charlotte's a big finance capital now, probably right after New York when it comes to top influential, or New York and probably San Francisco. But I mean, it's a huge hub now, and it's Atlanta's growing. It's interesting that that we're already kind of seeing that happen. And we already kind of see a shift also, because what happens when they come to these other places is that then the price of things goes up, because we're we got all these people coming in from New York. We're still earning New York wages, and they're earning a ton. They're just paying $4,500 a month for rent. It's we could charge them $2,000, no big deal. But now we're going to charge everybody $2,000. And then it causes a problem, because then you got people who are locals here, and that leads to gentrification, because then people can't afford to live in there anymore. So, I mean, we're already seeing it, right? But I just kind of want to call that out real quick. Because we see it where we live. It's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, my dad's a real estate agent, and he's seen that as well. Luckily, it hasn't rent is going up and housing prices are going up, but my dad is, we live in Atlanta, and he's if you invest in a house now, you're still getting a good deal if you look at housing prices on the scale of the country as a whole. You look at a single family home in California, compare it to one in Georgia or Texas or the Southeast.
It's not a good deal locally, but it's a good deal when you look at the big picture. It could be a lot worse, that's for sure. It could be a whole lot worse. But with the decadence, go up, please. Let's discuss.
So decadence. I'll just read this bold part. What a society spends money on matters. When it spends on investment items that yield productivity and income gains, it makes for a better future than when it spends on consumption items that don't raise productivity and income. So this is intuitive. I think to me, you, and Ray Dalio was calling it out here, and this is kind of what we've been talking about. Although I'll throw out the asterisk. I think like some small degree of decadence is okay.
Yeah.
Like if you're investing, I don't know, in like a sports car, right? Or like, yeah, if you have one sports car just to have fun and kind of let loose on the weekends, or like pursue a hobby that's going to let you like mentally become a more productive person,
Mhm.
you know, it's okay. But I think if taken too far, you're not realizing like kind of the, I don't know, like the stress relief gains that allow
Yeah.
you to be a more productive person.
And I think even just like weddings, I think are a big problem too, because I feel like people always like. I mean, it's nice to have a nice wedding, right? You don't want to have a shitty wedding where it's just like it's you can only invite like. I mean, I'm sure it would be fine for some people, but you don't want to be like in a shack, just like out here, just getting married in like a barnyard. Like, I mean, it's probably not ideal. You want to have a nice little thing, have some drinks for people, have guests. You want to have maybe some level of food. I mean, you want something nice. It's your wedding day. I mean, it's a celebration. But I think that there's a lot of people that I know that have made the decision to not go to the nth degree for the wedding because they realize, what would I rather spend? I think my friend Gabriel basically had the issue where it was okay, I'm getting this money as like basically a wedding gift from my wife's father. Do I use this? He's willing to pay for either a really extravagant wedding or give it in cash as a down payment for a house.
Mm.
What's a better value of your money? I would say definitely the house. It's a no-brainer. But I think a lot of people there's a lot of families who will go seriously in debt to basically fund a really extravagant wedding. And it's like, you're paying all this for one night. For
And
one night. As opposed to building a future off of an actual plot of land after actually even just maybe even buying a car for them, like, hey, like buy a car. Now it's paid for. That's an asset to you now. That's an asset. It's something you own that you have control of for the rest of the time unless you decide to sell it. It's like, I don't understand that, but I think that's part of that decadence. I think that in the United States specifically, there's a big push for that. It's like, oh no, you don't have the nicest wedding at the nicest venue and the most guests there and all the little bits and pieces that like it's like or the nicest ring, which I think is the dumbest part of all. It's like, why? Like that was built as an industry thing to promote decadence. It wasn't. There's no history back in the day of people posing diamond rings. It's not a thing. It was a company that said, "Hey, you should start doing this. It's a sign of love."
yeah,
And people were like, "Oh yeah, I'll spend freaking 10K on a ring and then spend another 30K on the wedding itself." That's absurd. That's $40,000 for what? But I think it goes into the decadence. It says jewelry and clothes, so
yeah, I agree. The next point on Ray's like I don't know indicators of being stage 5 part of the cycle is bureaucracy.
Yeah.
He goes, while early in the internal order cycle, bureaucracy is low. It is high late in the cycle, which makes sensible and necessary decision making more difficult. And it's pretty interesting that America was like designed this way. We were designed to have like checks and balances and barriers to like quick transition and stuff like that. And I think when a country or an empire or self-governing entity has like its values, its decision making capabilities, like going in the right direction, bureaucracy is good. Like not changing your course from a good course is good,
right.
Or not being able to change your course from a good course is good. But when we look at today, where okay, yeah, like we've slowly drifted like off course, off of good decision making, and now we're at a point where it's like, having all these checks and balances kind of sucks.
Yeah.
It it I don't know. I wish there was some sort of like measure we could take to implement like a strong leader or they make the decisions. And there isn't a whole lot of incentive for leaders to do that because it's that like sacrifice now, benefit later mentality that a lot of people like that are, you know, live in this country today under the influence of like Hollywood and all these people that want you to live like a rock star or influencer or in decadence. Makes it challenging for those leaders who want to make the hard decisions to get elected in the first place.
Right.
And then when they actually do get elected and do make the hard decisions, people can't zoom out enough sometimes to see that these decisions are good for the country, even though it hurts now. And they won't get reelected.
Right.
You know, it just kind of sucks. And yeah, I think,
or because even just because the stigma on that person is so strong that it's like you're gonna ignore all the actual good. You're just gonna kind of just be like, oh well, this guy, this is what I've heard about him, but I've not done any research myself. But what they're doing is actually good for the country. But you're just like, oh, but the person, like, oh, I don't like the person. So what? I mean, you hate your boss half the time, but generally they're making pretty good calls because they're the boss for a reason, right? So it's like, I don't know, but continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, I mean that's about all I was gonna say. It's a little tough being in a democracy right now.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I love that if you know we all have a say. It just kind of sucks that, you know, when a lot of the people in the democracy are deceived or making bad decisions, that bad decisions can reign, and we all suffer the consequences. Even the people that like see the good decisions that we need to make, the hard decisions we need to make, that'll lead us to I don't know a more successful future.
Yeah.
You know,
but I think the bureaucracy is also kind of really talking about the establishment. I know it's a pretty hot button word, but it's the establishment because the bureaucracy is these people who are pretty much, it's almost like a separate class of people. It's like, you know, you got rich class, you know, upper class, middle class, but bureaucracy is like almost like back in the day when there was like warrior class and these sorts of things. It's like the government class. It's like the leader class. And it's like these people, I think we've seen, and there's a lot of attention on it now, these people have become so complacent and content with gridlock that people are starting to see that these people are all bad. It's not that we just have one or two bad apples. There's like one or two good apples.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's a complete reversal of what we wanted. And I think that that's going to come because, you know, the way our system is we can't just kick everybody out. So it's like, what is the real question is what needs to happen to kind of clear house a little bit, you know, get rid of everybody.
I totally agree. And one of the other dynamics that Ray Dalio brings up that makes it hard to kind of make that clear house or like I guess within the system that we have, I think it's populism and extremism. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot, but the funny thing is, a lot of people in those, at least in Congress and stuff, like these establishment people, they're not really partisan. They kind of just do whatever's best for them. And
Selfish.
yeah, and I think extremism. I mean, if we look at populism from the perspective of like, I think that if anything's going to come to change it, it's not going to be from one political party. I think it's going to be discontent from everybody. They're going to be like, what is our common ground? You know, oh, well, everybody in power sucks, essentially. You know, like they're all corrupt, awful human beings. Like I would say with confidence that 95% of Congress is just slimy human beings. Like just like beyond saving. Like honestly, like they're just so deep in just shit, for lack of a better term, that there's just no pulling them out. Like they're gonna stink no matter what. So I think by people having these, I mean, not necessarily extreme, but I would say having contrary views, which I think probably the majority of Americans do believe that there's a problem with the establishment. I don't think if it's politically charged. I just think that everyone kind of knows that our system's kind of screwed. Like I think most people recognize that no matter what party they're in.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with our democracy right now is populism and extremism, because it's like, okay, we see all these problems that are happening in democracy, like where everyone can kind of get behind some sort of idea that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Is it can run rampant, like that populism ideology.
Oh yeah.
And then extremism is like, okay, we see everything is bad, so let's tear it down.
Right.
That's the extremist view. That's like, if we tear everything down, we're gonna have anarchy, and we're gonna run into a civil war, or maybe not. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a civil war, like just intense conflict all across the country.
Yeah.
And it's like we also run the risk of like maybe overcorrecting.
Sure.
I think that could be like a symptom of, or maybe like a sign where it's like, yeah, let's tear everything down, like clean house.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I think if we clean house the right way, it's probably a good thing. But if we clean house as in tear down or tear our constitution in half and tear down our government buildings, then we're like, okay, we're really in for a lot of work, a lot of pain. And I mean, maybe it would be good in the long term to do that, but I think there's a easier way to realize those like long-term gains and like get good leadership that makes good decisions.
In my opinion, honestly, I think if I were starting this revolution, not saying I'm starting a revolution if the CIA or FBI is listening, but like what I'm saying, I think that what I would do primarily is get rid of all the people in public office power on the highest level. Get rid of them, clear them out. And honestly, I think most government entities need to clear house. Like, you go to the DMV and you're like, what the hell is this? This is the worst experience of my life. These people are all super complacent. They don't give a damn about anything. Education system is rotten. All of these things are rotten. Like, it's just bad. So, but from like a high level political standpoint, it would be get rid of these people and take out the connection of money into politics. Remove it. Get rid of it. Because ultimately, in my mind, I think that we would have a lot more motivation and a lot more people who really want to see change implemented, and they're doing it for the right reasons if you just pay them the standard government salary.
Yeah.
Because why? Because a lot of these people don't really need the money. They're there because they have a passion in this, and this is something that they're really devoted to, and they want to spend 5 years of their life working in politics. They want to make some change either for the local community, for the state at large, for the country, whatever. But by doing that, you're eliminating financial incentive to basically compromise on what you're doing and basically turn you from an otherwise good egg into a rotten. So if you break that bridge, cut it off at the stem, then I think that you can have a lot more motivated and a lot less complacency and just like foul backroom deals and stuff like that going on. I just think that like it would eliminate so much.
Yeah.
But I think our system's good, like you were saying. Like when it comes to our constitution, like it's sound. It's worked for a long time. I just think that we've gotten to the point where now we're kind of straying into a different world right now, and it's like we got to just keep it back to the basics for a little bit. Cut out that money connection because money fouls everything up.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I think on top of like all those things you just said, I honestly think America had a good dictator for like 20, 30 years that could like make the hard decisions that are, you put America back in the right direction for like long enough to help people like experience the success and like the well-being and the health of the country and the individual that like hard decisions would lead to, like hard good decisions would lead to. We could, I don't know, shift back to a democracy where it's like, or a bureaucracy where it's like it's harder to make major directional adjustments.
Right.
You know, because I think that is one of the most powerful things that was like established in this country. Like we were initially like set on a good direction overall. Like
Yeah.
obviously, you know, there were clear injustices that were happening in our initial direction. Like I mean, one is just slavery. Like slavery is not good. Like I think like women not voting wasn't good. Like if you're gonna have a democracy, like just let everyone have a say.
Everyone participates.
Or you know, maybe let you know, one thing that may be a little hot take is it might be nice to have like educational requirements in order to vote. Like I'm not saying like major ones, but like say like you know have a basic. This is good. This is starting down a dark path because we tried to do this for like Black people, right? And this was done in a very corrupt way in the past, but like it would be an awesome way to avoid mob rule.
Yeah.
Or like that comes along with democracy like all throughout history if we had like some sort of way to verify that like the people are voting like for the issues rather than like because they hate someone else.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of sound. Honestly, I don't disagree with you. I think that the only disagreement I have is I think that by nature people will make it a corrupt thing, and they will gear it towards certain groups, and because that's just what they do.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it's sound. I mean, when you're coming into the country, when you come into the country and you're immigrating here, to get your green card, basically become a citizen, you need to basically know lots of things about the United States. So you got to know how to do that. Like you get to know the like different portions of the Constitution. You know, I mean, I don't know exactly. I know it's like some things about like the national the Pledge of Allegiance. You got to know some things about the country.
Yeah,
because I mean that makes sense. Because you're joining a country, you got to show that you are invested and you're learning about the country, so that you can be a participating member. So I think that that's relevant. But I think beyond that, in education, I think
educational requirements like having a high school degree is a slippery slope because I mean people who don't get an opportunity to have a high school degree or maybe they're a farmer or something like that. It's just not a part of their community specifically. Like they can look out for the good of the country in a genuine way and like in a smart way and not have a high school degree.
Yeah, but the tough thing is what's the metric? You know, like what determines somebody who is doing something in the best interest of the country versus doing it not for that. You know, it's really hard to kind of quantify. And I'm sure there's a method, but you know, I think that there's in super urban neighborhoods and super rural areas, a lot of people don't know shit about shit, unfortunately. They don't know anything. They don't know anything. And it's like there's a lot of ignorance in this country as well. Like a lot of ignorant people on both sides. And it's like it's not even that you're just ignorant, it's that you don't even want to learn. You're just like, nah, dude, I can't stand them folks. You know, it's like, shut up, dude. Like learn something. Like learn something. But I think beyond that, it's kind of a sidebar. But I think just in education, I'm a firm believer that the United States has always been a place where you go and it's like where dreams come true. You know, you make the American dream happen. That's my go-to thing at work when they say, "How am I doing?" I say, "I'm living the American dream," but I'm not. But I mean, the point is that like you're supposed to come to this country and you can create a better future for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And achieve something that you can't do in other places. But I think that we should really go back for at least for a little bit to a system like what Japan has, where you go to school, it's government funded, same thing. You go to school, you get a standard education, and then you do placement exams, and they have a really, really, really well formulated exam program where they will place you in a certain area. So if you test really well and you did, you've always performed well in school, then at that point you go to university.
Yeah.
If you don't test very well and your skills do not align in that way, then you do not go to university. and instead you do something else. Either you do a trade, you go into maybe starting a business, you go into maybe farming, agriculture. Like they have placements for everybody, which I think works really well because then I think that finding that, but also not keeping people locked in. So having that program, but like if you're a farmer and you're like, hey, well, I kind of want to start my own business, the opportunity is still available to you, but it is in your better financial interest. For example, maybe with the whole college thing, I think there's way too many people going to college here. And it's like, for what? And I think at that point, the way I'm thinking about doing it like mathematically would be like, if you tested and you got placed in a university program, then if you were to get a loan or something for college, the interest rate would be very low on that one because you essentially, or nothing, you're basically getting this loan, maybe an interest-free loan because you were already placed and you're one of this maybe 15%, 20% of people that's going to school, going to college, further education. But then if you test and then you're doing agriculture, then it's like, yeah, sure, if you still want to do college, you can, but your interest rate's going to be a lot higher. You're going to be looking at like 7-8%. Why? Because the risk is there. Because this guy is not prepared for college. This guy is not going to probably do anything productive. I mean, we're not going to get a return on investment from this person. Well, I mean, if they're getting a psychology degree, what the hell are we going to get from you? You're going to be getting paid what? Doing all of that, getting $40,000 a debt just to earn $40,000 a year? Like, come on. Like, I'm serious. It's like, it's wild. It's like, at that point, you should create the opposite of a financial incentive and be like, yeah, you can do it. The possibility is there, and you could probably still make yourself a great life if that's what you want to pursue. But ultimately, you're not going to be incentivized to do that.
I think you're hitting on the decadence problem, like not using money productively.
Yeah,
which is a huge factor.
Yeah.
Huge factor.
Well, I think that solution can provide so much for people because then at that point, I think student loan things, I think it's absolutely absurd that we're charging people this much money for education. I think it's absolutely crazy. So I think in my solution, I think that like at that point, I would expect that the student loan thing would be virtually gone. I mean, because at that point, you have way less people going to the institutions, so the institutions, and if it's already kind of like subsidized in a way, at that point, it's like, well, what's the harm here? And then you still make your money back by these students who either their parents have the means or they decide that they want to go to school despite where they were placed. And then at that point, you're like, okay, well, I can at least we can still get our money from the loan from these individuals who basically went against what they should have done.
Yeah.
So I think that it's only fair at that point. Some people deserve college. Some people work for college. Some people it's their thing, but some people it's not. So I don't know why we're pushing that agenda on everybody. It's like, yeah, everyone got to go to college, get a degree. Like, okay, what's an art degree going to do for you exactly? How are you going to contribute to the economy? How are you going to pay back your debt? Are you going to be able to even pay back your debt?
Yeah.
It's like, then what? Then what do? They default, and then what? I don't know. It's just, I think it's a little bit wonky.
So I think the problem with either of our solutions, like both of our solutions, certain, I guess, aspects of our solutions, treating individuals as individuals is like, I don't know, like class warfare, which is the next kind of point. Because it's like, okay, if you're lumped into let's say in your solution, right? Like if you didn't score well on whatever test it is, and you're lumped into, I don't know, the blue class or the blue collar versus the white collar and like educated class.
Sure.
Then and there's a narrative spun around that in the media where it's like, oh, why are all these people able to go to college for cheaper? And they morph the actual intent and like goal of like managing risk,
right?
Essentially, then you're going to end up in class warfare between the educated and the uneducated classes, or people that identify in those classes once the classes are like made up essentially by whoever's like writing about it.
Well, I don't think. Well, that's assuming that the people going and getting these white collar jobs, like with this system, the people, just like how you're incentivizing people who test well to go to college, you're also incentivizing people who don't test well to do something else. So you're saying, hey, well, listen, You may not be able to go to college. You may not be getting this finance job earning, $200,000 a year, but you're going to be earning a solid, $80,000, $90,000 doing some sort of farming work,
or maybe
or 100,000 to do electrician job. Like it's
or maybe if you like tested well in the hands-on aspects, like the farming portions of the hands-on aspects of this test, yeah, we'll provide you land.
Yeah.
If you tested well with like your business mind and like being able to farm and make good economic decisions despite not being able to like do math, like do like calculus super well or whatever, then yeah, we'll provide you with some land because we can trust that you're going to make good business decisions. You can turn this farm into a productive entity that earns money, and you can choose what crops to grow and know how to grow them.
Yeah,
because I mean, you're right. Like I think there should be incentives. Like maybe one person, the results of this test for this person result in lower loan interest rates for like college, but this other person gets land,
or like a subsidized. You take a land almost like a loan. You basically say, well, so long as you're providing your quota for whatever thing that you're producing, we can subsidize this interest free to where you can basically own this in 5 years or 10 years. This is yours after you've done kind of your thing here. And I think that that's like equally as important as giving somebody an interest-free loan for an education, because at that point you're giving them a tactile incentive to do what they're kind of placed to do. Like we all have a role in society. I think the big issue in the United States is that everyone wants to be everything that they can. And it's like, okay, well, you have a girl who's like in school failing all of her classes, but she wants to be an Instagram celebrity. It's like good luck. Yeah. Good luck, because with those skills, you're not gonna be able to do either. That's your one thing, and if you can't do that, then you are toast. And what's that girl probably gonna do? I'm not trying to pick on girls, I'm just saying, but like she's probably gonna end up going to some university that her parents are paying for, that is out of state, that she's paying $45,000 a year for a crappy education at Alabama or some party school, just to go back and live at home and create no value.
Yeah.
Create no value. And it's like, what that whole thing is so screwed up and flawed that it's like you have students. That's why we're getting outperformed by virtually every other international student community in this country, is because they come here and they're like, we got one goal. We're in education because I'm getting this freaking degree and I'm going to get all my A's and I'm going to get a job back home, and that's it.
Just like Usman. Just for context, Izzy and I, as we said before, we used to be roommates, and we used to live with this guy, Usman, who was a transfer student from Pakistan. And, he came to Georgia Tech, probably best technical public school in the country, maybe behind MIT, but like, definitely MIT of the South.
Yeah.
And today, he did really well. He got an electrical engineering degree. He tried really hard and, made the most of his education, and then went back to Pakistan. Is now started a business.
Yeah.
And he's putting his education to work.
And that's what you should do. But that's the thing. We take all this stuff for granted because these people are paying so much, but they know that they have a goal coming in. They got an outcome that they want. But instead here we got people who are like, oh, it's assumed that I'm going to go to college after high school. It's a given. It's a given. I mean, not for a lot of people, I know, but for anyone who's middle class and up, it's assumed. It's a given. And it's like, what skills do you have, really? Yeah. And when you leave college, a lot of the time, what skills did you gain? You have a degree in psychology and no knowledge, no skills. You still haven't learned anything. All you know how to do is party and drink. And it's like, that's not going to help you. And like, for what? And you're basically going into debt. Someone is basically providing you debt to gain nothing out of it. And that goes back to our consumerism kind of thing, where it's like people are spending money going into debt for something that doesn't increase their productivity or create any sort of real results, real outcome. That's what it is.
And I mean, I think us kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, getting riled up around about people who put their education to work or go to school for the right reason versus people who go to school for the wrong reason. I think that truly does go into class warfare.
Yeah.
you know, we're getting angry at like a group of people because they're making bad decisions, and on the same like on the other hand, like people can get angry at us, or get angry at other people, even if what they think isn't according to reality.
Right. I mean, just based on what we're saying, somebody can easily turn around and be like, "You guys are so entitled."
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I get what you mean. It's like it could, yeah. Even though it's like not at all, but I mean, ultimately, I just think that it is a class thing, and I think people do just like how we're raging about, or how I was raging about that one example. It's like it upsets me, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who are out there who are like, "Damn, well, my son like is doing really good, or my daughter's doing really well in school, but we don't have all this money to afford to send this child to school. Now she's going to community college and getting a job, and then it's like." There is some sort of level of inequality there because that individual has way more merit and way more actual incentive. They should be incentivized way more to go to school than girl number two who's out here just trying to party and go out. Like it's an obvious decision, but it's inequality nonetheless because then there's a level of hatred towards the other out of envy. It's like I like that could have been me, but I just don't have the money to do it.
You nailed it. It's hatred towards the other rather than like hatred of the inequality or of the system.
It's the person.
And they attribute like whoever it is getting angry, attribute like the bad decisions or the bad ideas or the lies or the what they perceive as injustice towards a group of people that they view as the other. And I think that is rampant around the US, and I think us having this conversation and anyone else listening kind of just knows that to be true. You go on Twitter and you just see, I don't know, people complaining, getting angry at other people for various reasons. It's not like getting angry at an individual because they like, beat you up or push you on the ground. It's like getting angry at a group of people because you maybe suffered some injustice from a single person or had a bad conversation with a single person and lumped them into the other side of whatever class spectrum you want to look at. That and that is running rampant.
And if you don't have an obvious other, like black and white has always been a big othering of other people for sure on both sides. It's always been that way. But I would say, if you don't have an other, that you're a person who you want to identify as the other, then people will find a way to create one. And whether that's, oh, I identify by they, them. Oh, they didn't call me that. They're an other. They're against exactly everything that I'm. It's like it's so ridiculous. It's like people try to find a difference to be able to say, you are another. You are the people who I don't talk to and I don't associate with. You're the problem. This one individual guy in college who said that he agrees with I don't know, agrees with DeSantis on one thing. He's like, well, you're the other. You're the reason why our country is like whatever. It's like, let's not be ridiculous. Like this guy's not creating policy. He's sitting here in a classroom. Like what is he doing to destroy the country? It's just he's voicing his opinion, and he doesn't know. He knows he probably doesn't know. He's in school. I mean, like, I don't know, but I do agree the othering is pretty bad. That's stage 5 for sure.
And I think a contributing factor to this class warfare and stuff like that is also loss of truth in the public domain, like people believing lies. And like just going back to the example of like othering people or like getting angry at a group of people or like getting angry at an individual and extrapolating that to a group of people, like it is a lie. It is a lie. You should be angry at, like, from my opinion, what I know to be true, based on my biblical worldview. Paul says this is a war against like principalities rather than people. We don't want to be getting angry at like people who believe in something you disagree with or something you believe to not be true. You want to be getting angry at the thing that isn't true. And like, I don't know, like kind of trying to make that distinction. It is really hard. It is really hard, especially when there are like lies, especially when like, the media will like, twist some sort of data point to make like someone think, yeah, I'm believing in the truth because the statistics point that way. But in reality, like the media is incentivized to, get views. And a lot of times that comes down to twisting statistics in a certain way that isn't an accurate representation of the truth in order to get more views. And I think that's a huge problem right now, and I think that also goes into like propaganda and stuff. It's like the government is incentivized to put out information in a certain way to accomplish a certain agenda that like the agenda is ultimately to get reelected. That like you said, there's money in politics right now. Whether that's through just like, a good government salary that is maybe a little bit higher than it should be, or even something as simple as like, wanting, lobbying, like playing along with some sort of idea because the company is going to pay you money, or even like insider trading. Like, I know I'm about to make this policy, or I know Congress is about to make this policy because I'm a part of Congress. Now I'm going to invest in a certain way because it's going to make me a ton of money.
It's like, oh yeah, we're about to increase our actual like military budget. Let me go ahead and invest in Lockheed and Raytheon. Let me go ahead and just put my money in because I know it's coming, so I might as well get that little jump in value. It's like it's a little crazy, but
it's just a complete lack of truth and honesty, transparency, and I don't know. Right now, and by the way, the loss of truth in public domain is one of the signs of stage 5, which is on page 176.
I do want to touch on real quick for the sake of time so we can hit stage 6, talk about that piece. But real quick, last bit of stage 5 I wanted to talk about was the 175, watch populism and polarization as markers. The more that populism and polarization exist, the further along a nation is in stage 5 and the closer it is to civil war and revolution. In stage 5, moderates become the minority. In stage 6, they cease to exist. So that's a really interesting point because I love to identify myself as a moderate. I don't know if I really am, but I mean, I think that in general, though, I think we had talked before about the silent majority during like 50s and stuff like that. That people were like weren't really outwardly vocal, but they voted very predominantly conservatively, and they're just kind of like the silent majority. And I think that honestly, I think that still exists today. It's still applicable, but at least. I mean, it would be really hard to kind of pull right until you see the next election, and even then, there's a lot of shady stuff going on with the election process, and it always kind of has been with this electoral college business. But I mean, beyond that, I would say that at least from what you can see, based on optics, if you're just outside looking into the country, looking on Twitter, looking on news sources, you don't see a single damn moderate person out there. Not one. News sources are all biased. Actual politicians are super biased as well. They're way more extreme than they were before in the past. Super divisive. People literally are at each other's throats about everything. And it's like, even the Ukraine thing is now another example of like, there's no middle ground with Ukraine. People don't want to hear. Either you're with Ukraine or you're essentially supporting Russia in some way, and there's no middle ground whatsoever on any of these things. There's no, I respect transgender people for their identity. I'm not gonna go out of my way to disrespect them or anything like that. Like you do your thing, I guess. But at the same time, I really don't think transgender people should be in sports and stuff like that. I don't think you should have biological males performing in women's athletics. It's like, oh, that means you're anti-trans. It's like, no, I just said just
pro women's sports.
I just want a separation there. Like ultimately, like you have women who literally are saying that like they're not even told that there's a biological male in their dressing room, and it's like, come on, like they don't want it. You're pushing this agenda, and ultimately, it's like I'm saying honestly, out of my deep at the bottom of my heart, like I will not outwardly disrespect anybody unless I get disrespected. So if you want to be called they, them, I will do my best to accommodate, but ultimately, like, I'm not going to disrespect you. If that's what you want to do. I have my opinions, but like, you do your thing. I'm not going to go out of my way. However, there is the other side. I have another opinion, but it's like even that's kind of like a middle ground opinion. I'll respect your identity, but let's not crisscross, these things because we don't need
It's not
males.
black and white.
Yeah, it's a gray area, especially with something like that. It's a very gray area of how you handle it. It's like, but people will automatically either say one or the other. Like, if they're really anti-trans or whatever, they'll be like, "Oh, well, you're supportive of it," and then on the other hand, they'll be like, "Well, you're not supportive enough. You hate us because you're saying that we shouldn't be in sports." It's like, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't be in sports. Just you're a male, biologically, you're born as a male. You have different hormones. You should perform with the men.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, that's all I'm saying. So I think it's just a little crazy, but that kind of goes to that, in stage 6, they don't exist. And I think we're very close to a point where nobody is on the fence anymore.
Yeah.
I
And
think so.
so what last thing I want to touch on before we go to stage 6, and this is like, you brought this up earlier. So it's I guess I think this is the last symptom of stage 5. This on 178, page 178, rule following fades and raw fighting begins. When the causes that people are passionately behind more important to them than the system for making decisions, the system is in jeopardy. Rules and laws work only when they are crystal clear, and most people value working within them enough that they are willing to compromise in order to make them work well. When winning becomes the only thing that matters, unethical fighting becomes progressively more forceful in self-reinforcing ways. When everyone has causes that they are fighting for and no one can agree on anything, the system is on the brink of civil war and revolution. And I don't know. I think I just want to bring up one example that you brought up earlier. It's like the riots in Chicago, or people are like looting and like burning police cars and burning cars in general. Of like bystanders, it seems like in a lot of cases. It's like
random guys in his car. He's like, "Come on, guys! Like, what did I do?"
And then the leadership, like the mayor is like, yeah, these are reparations. These, like, people deserve to be breaking the laws because the laws weren't in their favor in the past
to begin with. It's like,
and I'm not going to argue that the laws weren't corrupt at one point in time. I'm not going to argue that they still aren't corrupt.
Sure.
But I don't think that's an excuse to go and break the laws more than like go and just try and change them with like facts, reasons, and like peaceful free speech.
right.
And I think because we're seeing like these riots and stuff like that, it is pretty concerning.
Well, I think even beyond that, I would say even like lack of leadership. Like, I would say objectively, we can all agree, like, if you're a leader of a place and people are violating the law and going rampant, your responsibility as a strong leader is to basically say, no, we're deterring this. Like, we can't be having a lawless land. Like, no way. Like, I'm sorry, as a strong leader, that's your role, to provide safety and security for everybody who you're leading. That's why you're a leader, right? And it's like when you're basically giving the thumbs up, it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're destroying your own community. Like, you're basically doing exactly the opposite of what you basically promised you'd do coming in, which is to protect and make sure that everybody is, not everyone's always going to be happy, but you make sure that at least the safety and security of people and their belongings and their homes is always there. They need to be safe.
It's like we follow the laws because that's kind of like our social contract. We agree that like the laws are there to be followed, and that if the laws are unjust, there are other laws in place that allow for the unjust laws to be changed.
Right.
And when I don't know, like breaking the law is a slippery slope. Breaking the law to change laws is a slippery slope. And I think once you get too far into that, you do get into stage 6.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good transition to try and talk about stage 6.
Civil War. Not Captain America Civil War, guys. Not a fun Civil War.
Yeah. And so just to recap, Different stages require, this is page 182, different stages require different types of leaders to get the best results. Stage 5 is a juncture in which one path could lead to civil war or revolution, and the other could lead to peaceful and ideally prosperous coexistence. And so I think stage 6 represents kind of that first path,
Right.
where there's a leadership and the people are in like a certain place where, yeah, we do lead to like violence and breaking the laws, change the laws that people view as unjust. And so stage 6, when there are civil wars. Civil wars, this is page 183, civil wars inevitably happen. That's pretty big.
Yep.
They inevitably happen. So rather than assuming it won't happen here, which most people in most countries assume after an extended period of not having them at the U.S., it is better to be wary of them and look for the markers to indicate how close one is. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting. The U.S. Civil War is a really same page, 183. It was a really bloody civil war that failed to overturn the system/order, so it is in the second group of the bottom of the table, while those that toppled. I just think that one point was interesting. The U.S. Civil War failed to overturn the system, which I guess it's true. It overturned a system because it got rid of slavery, but there was still Jim Crow. Yeah, it was still segregation. So it's like they kind of did what they sought out to do. They rooted out the insurrection, but at the same time, they didn't really like.
Yeah.
The best thing, I think a lot of it was like now when we hear back about it, it's like, oh, Abe Lincoln wanted what's best for the slaves and black people in the South, and it's like, well, we didn't really do that. Like he kind of just like there's just a lot of Americans died and they outlawed slavery, but what happened to the slaves? They're like, oh shoot, we have nowhere for you to come. You actually can't come. We actually don't want you up north. Like just stay down there. We'll like, you can still basically do slave work, and we're just going to pay you the bare minimum.
Yeah.
So it's basically continuing the same thing. It's not like nothing really changed.
Yeah. I think the Civil War would have technically overturned the internal order or whatever if the South had successfully seceded.
Right.
And there were like two countries of the ununited states, I suppose.
Yeah. What is that? I've never heard of them. I'm looking at these now. This list on 184. I've never heard of I know the Boxer Rebellion, but I've never heard of the Panthay Rebellion or the Muslim Rebellion. China. I've never heard of those. I don't know what those are. I'm curious to see. Like, can you pull it up? Like, see what the Muslim Rebellion is or the Panthay.
Yeah. Let me share my screen real quick.
I mean, I'm assuming if it says Muslim Rebellion, I'm assuming it's just the Muslim population of China rebelling. But I'm curious to see like what initiative
And what year was it in?
1862. Yeah,
So let's go to Wikipedia.
okay. That guy looks sick.
Okay, so Chinese Muslims were uprising.
Okay.
Yeah, with riots and massacres of the Han Chinese. Is pretty interesting. Followed by the revenge massacres of the Hui by the Han.
The Han killed them. That's okay.
Yeah. Resulted in massive demographic shifts in northwest China and led to a population loss of 21 million people. Wow.
That's a lot of people. Holy, I don't know. That's crazy. Never heard of that. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
21 million? That's 3 Holocausts. What?
Yeah.
That's like a lot of people.
Wow. According to research by modern historians, at least 4 million Hui, which are the Muslims, I believe, were in Shanxi, which I think is like maybe a province or something before the revolt, but only 20,000 remained in the province afterwards. Most of the Hui either killed in massacres and reprisals or deported out of the province. On one occasion, 700 to 800,000 Hui from Shaanxi were deported to Gansu.
Gosh.
Most were killed along the way from thirst, starvation, and massacres by the militia escorting them, with only a few thousand surviving.
That's
Wow.
wild, yeah.
Wow.
Well, and that's classified as cases that didn't create changes to the system or regime, which I guess makes sense because, I mean, this is almost like a blown up version of the Uyghur thing that's going on now, right? So it's like, I mean, it's, if anything, it might have actually helped promote the Chinese state, basically saying that we don't want anybody here who's not Han Chinese, you know, who's not Eastern Chinese, like all these Tibetans, all these Muslims, all these, you know, ethnic Central Asians, like we don't want them here, essentially.
Yeah.
If anything, it just promoted what's going on now.
Yeah. I have to agree. And
that's crazy.
by the way, I just wanted to throw out there one of Izzy and I's other roommates, name's Ben. His parents were missionaries in China. And one of the things I asked Ben one day was whether the Uyghur Muslim, like, I don't know, like massacre or like whatever's going on, that conflict in China was actually true or whether it was Western propaganda. And Ben's answer was that his parents went over to the province where the Uyghurs like mostly live, and they heard from that population, the people living around there, that it's happening. It's happening. Like concentration camps and stuff like that, like being re-educated. Like, that's happening. Like people are being tortured for being Muslims, and that's not
What's
good.
interesting to me is that like it's wild because I mean it doesn't cause. I mean it's just a program. I don't mean to stay off topic here, but it's just interesting because it's like China is basically saying that like we don't want outside people who are non-Chinese, and if you're operating in a way that we don't like, then and they've been doing it for a long time, and it's like, you know, these people are not ethnically Chinese. It's very categorically obvious. They look Asian, but they're not Han Chinese. They're not ethnically the same. So it's like, I don't know. It's just a whole different level of like, basically we need to, if we can't basically do what we did during this Muslim revolt or whatever, like and basically just kill them all, then, and the world's going to hate that, then we need to find a way to basically make sure that there aren't more, which is sterilization, which is basically reprogramming their minds, brainwashing these people into basically becoming the drones, almost a drone equivalent of what they were. You know, and taking away all tradition and basically making them these kind of empty shells of what they were, which is wild. I mean, it's quite evil, actually, quite nefarious.
I think when we're reading Ray Dalio's book here, I'm interested to see if he like addresses that stuff because it was written in like 2020, and his argument is obviously like China's kind of on the rise, and I don't know. I don't think he's arguing that it's a perfect country, but China also has these internal conflicts that, and like major propaganda campaigns that like, you know, make the truth in the public domain deviate heavily from what is actually true. That like represent. I mean, China could very well just fall to some civil war. You never really know. Yeah, they have a very different government structure, which probably will discourage that behavior a lot more effectively than the U.S. right now.
Root it out the minute it comes up. They would root that out. They'll be like, "Oh, we found it. Okay, we got cameras there. We see this guy's congregating. That's suspect. Getting interrogated."
But it is very interesting that you know, China is also going through these things, and they're on the rise. So it's a little bit hopeful, I guess, in my eyes. That it's like, okay, there's other countries that are also on the rise. You know, are kind of able to navigate these situations without civil war.
Right. Talking about civil war, what do you think a civil war / revolution? What would a stage 6 look like in the American use case?
So, civil war. I mean, I don't in America. I don't know. There would maybe be two sides. There might be more than two sides. But if I had to say, okay, let's say it's a two-side civil war. I mean, it's the right, the conservative, the religious population, specifically like the Christian population, kind of like not wavering in their like dearly held beliefs, fighting against people from the left who have a more progressive ideology and are more than likely like don't believe in God, don't like really respect Christian values, biblical values all that much, or they don't respect maybe like they respect maybe the values, but they don't respect it coming from the Bible. And maybe they foster some sort of hatred towards religious people who view their religious texts as truth and want to live by that truth for themselves, and even live in a society where that truth is the rule of law for the most part. I honestly think if it was anything like if it were those two types of groups, then it would be kind of people who generally fall in those two categories. And it would also probably be, for the most part, like, again, like maybe South versus North and like West, or maybe South and Midwest versus kind of West and North.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I agree with that. I think that's very possible. I think in that circumstance, if it's regional, I think it's pretty obvious the South wins. We got a lot more guns for sure.
Yeah.
We got a lot more guns. But honestly, I think if it's going to be anything, I think it's going to be more of a revolution. I think it's going to be more people. I think it's going to start off with cities going into revolt, which is already kind of happening. And I think the toppling of those kind of local systems of government, becoming sort of like a Haiti situation where it becomes almost like a lawless land. You got like gang groups and militant organizations basically running different sections of the city, and it's gonna be a pretty like a lawless sort of area, and a lot of people are gonna flee to like other places.
Yeah.
And then I think at that point, there's not going to be government like federal funding for these people moving. So I think it's going to become a point where people are going to become frustrated. And I think it's going to become an overall like our system is screwed, and I think that it's going to be kind of like people are going to be like, you know what, like no, either march on Washington, some sort of thing like that, where it's just either going to be it can be a nonviolent way, or it can be you can turn into chaos pretty quickly. And I think it can become like a citizens versus police and armed forces sort of thing, where you have militia groups basically going in and they're either paid by people or unpaid, and they're going in and they're basically setting up their kind of area, and they're kind of doing like strike groups, and they're going in and kind of taking out some things. And that's what I think. But
I agree with that. I just wonder, like, okay, if it was going to be citizens versus government, essentially, I would say more than likely, very similar to our previous Civil War, it's going to be citizens. Well, actually, yeah, like on the conservative side versus kind of the citizens on the progressive side and the government. And the reason I think that is because, like, kind of the left, the progressive ideologies kind of are like, right now advertised in our military. There are a lot of like high-ranking officials that do kind of subscribe to those ideologies, whether they're like they actually like the ideologies or they're compelled to because that's how they got their job.
Right.
And in addition to that, I mean, I think we see our cities are kind of like majority left-leaning, in our like institutions in general, like Washington and stuff like that. Like, push came to shove, I think the left would, maintain control over those institutions with the military. And it wouldn't be until like the military's or the, I guess, leadership, the left-leaning leadership, told the military to go and start like attacking or like just controlling situations where more freedom-centered, liberty-centered, right-leaning people like want to govern themselves.
Yeah.
And So one thing I'll add on to that is I know there are a lot of conservatives and right-leaning individuals, especially in like the fighting groups
Yeah.
of the military, like the National Guard and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So I also think, if a lot of our military might kind of break off, defect exactly from the higher ranking generals who are more inclined to not defect because I mean most of their responsibility is to implement what they're told to do by the
chain of command.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think as you get lower and lower on that chain of command or have less time in that chain of command, which usually indicates you're lower on the chain of command, you're the ones fighting, you're more likely to defect. And so I don't know. A civil war would not look good. There would be a lot of violence.
But I think two things here. I think when it comes to what you're talking about the chain of command and the lower people defecting, I think honestly, I think that if the revolution would happen, it would be more in war. Honestly, I think that would be the time where people would do it because they'd be like, oh, well, military forces occupied elsewhere, Ukraine, maybe Taiwan, maybe, oh, it's a perfect time for us to do this kind of like lax military presence here. And the next thing you know, and I think another thing is I don't think it would be conservatives versus liberals in the military or in the government. I think a lot of liberal progressive people, I kind of talked about before this, was like how they also identify that the system is quite broken, quite corrupt. And I think that a lot of those individuals who have a lot of money coming from California, for example, starting business in Texas or starting business in North Carolina, Georgia, they're going to be like, hey, maybe I can be the money behind this. I can basically fund these militia groups to basically go and do these things for me because it's kind of in my interest too. It's along my ideology. I think because progressive people, the word progressive means you want change and reform, right? So it's like a lot of them, I'd say most of the country probably identifies that there's serious problems. And I think as long as those kind of well-off top 1% individuals, as long as they're not super invested in the system and they don't have ties to politics and things like that, which, a lot of them, I'm sure some of them don't, or they have their own opinions about it. So it's like, I feel like they would be the ones, kind of the financial factors of it. I think. They have the money. The progressives have the money. The conservatives have the guns.
One thing to think about as well is if we have a civil war, do you think we are looking at a collapse in the U.S. dollar, like as the global reserve currency status? If the government is concerned with, I don't know, printing money to pay their generals and military and, probably hiring militia groups themselves to fight some sort of conflict, and you're going to have to print a lot of money because if the country is in war, you're not going to be able to produce like normal consumer economic stuff that generates income. We could also be looking at like the U.S. dollar collapse, or like a more rapid one. That would be a pretty big game changer too, because now all of a sudden the people who have the classical signs of wealth, like a lot of money in the bank or whatever, now necessarily wouldn't have all of that. And unless they were invested correctly in, I don't know, like guns and ammo or certain like maybe buildings or like certain assets like food and water and just like basic stuff that would, like, I don't know, for like kind of fuel a military supply chain directly. Those might be the kinds of people who hold the wealth and power.
Well, I think it would be kind of like a reset back to like the 6 stages. I think it would be back to stage 1, but instead of like the power would be more, I think farmers would be kind of the most top notch people because they would have everything. They have food, they have water, they have supplies, they have home,
skills,
land,
bro.
They have
skills. I guarantee you, like 2% of the population max in the U.S. knows how to grow their damn food.
Oh yeah, no,
that is not good. And to your point, if that 2% knows how to grow food and they leverage those skills properly, like that is going to be very powerful.
Yeah, and I think it can be a return to the agrarian United States, where the farmers are the ones who are kind of like the largest base of the bottom of that pyramid. It's the farmers, and things kind of come from that. But
and also oil.
yeah, oil.
If you look at like Texas, where there's a lot of oil, or off the Gulf of Mexico, or I don't know, maybe not Alaska, because you got to maintain the pipelines and stuff for that. But I think Texas is going to represent a very powerful population if civil war happens, because they are close to the Midwest where food is grown. There's a lot of guns in Texas, obviously, and there's a lot of oil in Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only drawback they have is like, water, and maybe infrastructure in terms of like electricity, as we saw, like
they can get a lot of their resources from Mexico.
Yeah.
So I mean, Mexico's right there, so it's like you don't really. I mean, you got food in the Midwest, but even if that's shut off, you got plenty of food in Mexico right there. You got a breadbasket too. You kind of dip in there and get some stuff. I mean, because I don't know if you know this, but corn actually was it was a Mexican product for a long time. The United States used to buy it from Mexico as like a staple agricultural product. Until we basically took their growing mechanisms and their agricultural strategy for how to actually mass produce corn, and we brought it to the States. And then we said, oh, well, NAFTA though, right? It's all good. Like, we don't mean to take your stuff, but like,
Canada, you want in on this?
Yeah, you have some of our corn too, and then we became the corn producing country.
Yeah.
So it's like ultimately they have the resources. So I mean, Texas is in a very strategically good place. I think, and also just the fact that Texans have their own general identity, I think that could very well. It's a very real solution that Texas could just even stay out of it entirely and just self-sustain themselves and just be like, okay, we're going to just become our own country then. It's always what we wanted to do. So.
And one thing, just for those listening who, maybe are like, what are the odds we're in a civil war or whatever? I just want to point out there that one thing Ray Dalio says over history, typically the people who led the Civil War or Revolution and still are well-educated people from middle-class backgrounds. And, I'm not trying to toot our own horn here, but, like, we're well-educated. We went to, one of the best public schools in the world. And I don't know, I grew up middle class. I'm pretty sure you did, too. So it's like, I think all, Ray Dalio is saying here is middle class, like, does represent that moderate view of society. Like, they're able to, like, take a look at like what's actually going on, and they're not biased because they're super rich or like super poor. They're able to provide for their needs over time, and can kind of, like, if they're well educated, devote the mental energy to thinking about and like analyzing, okay, what do these like symptoms lead to? Like, what is our diagnosis?
Right.
And so the scary thing is, like, we may just be right.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question. Knowing we're in stage 5, and kind of since we discussed what stage 6 looks like, do you think we're going to take the path of civil war to get to stage 1, or do you think we're going to take the path of peaceful kind of means to get back to stage 1?
I think ultimately it just depends on leadership, like who our next leader is going to be. I think if it stays on the current path, I think it's civil war is what's going to happen. I think if we get a strong leader who resonates with the general public that can unite the country, I think that would be really good too. But I mean, I think that would cause, for less, and even if that means a guy like, DeSantis, who's like not, people don't love him, but ultimately he's not a Donald Trump divisive. He's not. People don't like him for a lot of reasons, for sure. But you don't see half the bad publicity he's getting than what Donald Trump's getting. Donald Trump it's Donald Trump just by nature who he is. He's a very divisive person. So I really just think it depends.
I'll tell you one thing though. One thing that scares me about DeSantis was, like, I agree with you. If we have the right leader, we can make this like peaceful transition. I personally think that leader is likely Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
I think if DeSantis gets into office, enough people hate him enough, like, mainly not because of his economic decisions, but mainly because of his like very strong stance against like progressive values and like a very intentional stance against those values, specifically like don't say gay or whatever you want to think about there. I think if he gets into office, that is actually a pretty dangerous path because enough people hate him that you know people may revolt, especially if he implements like equally strong policies directly in the face of progressive values.
Right.
And he's a young enough person that he doesn't have the strength or the experience or the wisdom to like really be able to like control the situation.
Right.
If the country starts revolting, and I think we could just be in pure chaos if that happens. Versus, Donald Trump, like, yeah, if he gets into office, yeah, people are going to be pissed. Just like
it's going to be a bad ending.
Just like Ron DeSantis. But I'll tell you one thing: Donald Trump is very strong, and he can rally the folks. He really can. He can really like. He knows that, like, I don't know. I respect Donald Trump's response in COVID. Like when people were getting a little afraid, I mean, a lot afraid, and there was a lot of potential for chaos. Donald Trump, rallied like the manufacturing plants in the U.S. to manufacture ventilators.
Right.
Like that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was like World War I, World War II, where we rallied our manufacturing plants to produce guns to fight overseas.
Right.
And, like the population came together, and we had Operation Warp Speed, which represented a powerful step in the right direction, even if a lot of people didn't like it in the higher places. But and looking back on those things, we know ventilators weren't great for COVID. We know vaccines weren't great for COVID, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, those weren't the best directions to take, but it represents a lot of potential for me.
Sure.
That like, if he gets into office, if he starts implementing policies that people start revolting against, that he could control the situation and bring like a path with less violence, less death than Ron DeSantis did.
I think Kennedy, though, I think I agree with you. I think he might be a better option. Because, you hear Kennedy, everyone liked John Kennedy. Everyone liked him. Everyone liked Robert Kennedy Sr. Like, everyone liked these guys. John Kennedy was, no one can deny he's probably top 5, U.S. presidents ever, all time, and it doesn't matter about his party. He just had really strong policies, like, very much like America first, we take care of our own people. I said, like, ask not what you can do, for what country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, like,
big.
Like huge, like just like monumentous guy. Really powerful individual. I think having a name like that, a Kennedy name, and having a younger guy who knows who kind of has the thought process he has, not super partisan. I think he could be a really good fit. Honestly, the more I think about it, I think he could be a really good kind of binding force to kind of like bring people together, as opposed to being like, I think Trump. The issue with him is that he's just so. I don't know. I think that there's just such a stigma that at this point it's probably best to leave him in the past and tread something forward. Because I think if we have him again, then we're going to just have a vicious cycle of what just happened here, where we just got Biden as our next president. I think it's going to cause a similar thing, which I think in the end it's going to cause just bad outcomes. No matter what he does in his presidency, whether good or bad, people are going to either demonize him or make him a hero for it. Yeah. And I think that's not a healthy sign of a leader at all. I think that, like, in my mind, you want somebody who the public keeps you honest regardless of what the stigma or what the impression is of that person.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. Robert Kennedy right now is our best option for peaceful navigation through the end of stage 5 into stage 1. Hopefully skip stage 6. Ron or Trump are elected, we're probably going to stage 6, and then if Biden is reelected, bro, I think we're just going to collapse.
If Biden's reelected, then I think that the election is a scam. It's not real, because the amount of people who are just like, oh, screw Biden, you know, we need a new president. Like all the indications, all the signs are saying we're going to have a new president who's probably going to be the conservative side or definitely not Biden, you know, and it's like his approval ratings are garbage. And it's like if he gets reelected, yeah, they're fixing the election, confirmed. Like, there's no way this guy gets reelected, nor should he be real. I was even talking about my grandma's a pretty liberal lady, and I was telling her about it, and she was like, I think Biden's a good man at heart, but I don't know why he's going back for reelection. I think the Democratic Party really screwed up because they like put him in and then they put Kamala Harris, who nobody likes. Who nobody likes. They literally, it's so funny because it's in the name of like race and like we're gonna be inclusive when Kamala Harris, like, I could see somebody like Barack Obama, you know, a guy who was like a very well-educated guy, you know, regardless of what you think about his policies, really well-spoken, great statesman. I mean, he was, for sure. And he, very well-educated lawyer, you know, a constitutional lawyer, you know, he knew his stuff, came from a family, his father wasn't even from the country. That's the American dream right there. And, you know, an educated minority man who went and he basically did things all the right way and made it to the presidency. And yeah, sure, he made mistakes, but he was a great man. I mean, I can say that. I would probably say Obama's probably a good person. He doesn't seem like a bad person. But I'd probably, you know, have a drink with him, maybe, you know, smoke a cigar. He'd probably be a good person to talk to. But I mean, Kamala Harris is not that.
Yeah,
she's not that. She's not at all. When you hear her talk, you're like, what the hell is this lady saying? Like, what is she saying? Like, and they did that, and it's counterintuitive because they want to say, oh, we're totally not, Democratic Party's so inclusive, we love black people and stuff. Then you choose your vice president to be a black person who is the worst example of what a successful black woman can be. You're choosing this lady who is awful, you know, and then people hate her. And I'm like, no kidding, people hate her because she sucks, you know, she talks to people like they're stupid. Yeah. Like, it's ridiculous. But either way, for the sake of time, I think the battery's about to die. So you have any closing remarks, any closing thoughts?
I just wanted to hit the last factor. I think our leadership is a huge factor, one of the biggest factors, probably the biggest, maybe behind the negative economic shock that we could be presented with very soon. Sure. I think depending on how the country navigates, how our leadership navigates whatever recession we're about to go into, whether that's like by implementing radical policies or just, you know, hopefully they just make hard decisions that, it's going to hurt a little bit, but we're not going to be going into even more debt, like exponential debt. I think depending on how we deal with this situation ahead of us is also going to be like, you know, if we deal with this badly, we could see the chaos reign before we even get to the 2024 election, which, you know, so that's kind of my final thought on our conversation right now. Do you have anything else?
I mean, not really. I just hope that if we bypass step 6, I don't really want to be in step 6. It's not a great place to be in. So, you know, all we can do is make sure that we're doing our research and not, I don't know, trying to be cordial to other people. And, you know, at the end of the day, understanding facts goes over opinion and beliefs, you know, at the end of the day. So it's like, you know, you got to try to balance it, and hopefully we can navigate this in a way that's productive for everyone involved. You know, and we have a better, more safe and more kind of back to basics version of the United States than we kind of have clean things up a little bit.
The last thing I want to point out there is, you know, since we're thinking about, you know, elections, I guess, is what, you know, I'll be honest, I've never voted for the president. I thought the elections were rigged and stuff like that, but I am thinking about voting this election.
Yeah.
And as I said, specifically for Robert Kennedy, I think he is the best potential, and I also don't think Robert Kennedy is necessarily evil.
Yeah.
And when we think about like the problem with American psychology right now when it comes to elections is one, it's bipartisan, which sucks, and I'm so glad Robert Kennedy identifies as a Democrat because people won't be afraid to vote for him, especially if he gets that like Democratic nomination. But even if he doesn't, I think people will be like willing to vote for him. Sure, if he identifies as a Democrat. But also just encouraging people to not vote for the lesser of two evils. I told you this earlier. This is something I heard earlier. I think like last week or something like that. But if you're voting for the lesser of two evils, you still are voting for evil. And I would rather not vote than vote for evil. And personally, I don't think Robert Kennedy is evil in the grand scheme of things. I think Trump did enough stuff that I could classify him as evil, and Biden has done enough stuff that I think he's lumped into evil. Whether you think Trump is less evil than Biden or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. I think they've both proven that in the context of being the president, they are evil. And I don't think, I don't want to get too philosophical here or religious here, but I don't think anyone is good. But in terms of the best interest for this country, like what is going to be good for this country rather than less evil for this country, I do think Robert Kennedy is going to be our guy. And regardless of who you think that is, I think it's important to not vote for evil, even if it's less evil than some other guy. Because, if you put it like that, like, okay, yeah, Trump and Biden are a lot less evil than Hitler, but it's not a good argument.
No, and I mean, honestly, to piggyback, we're talking earlier about the middle ground, and I think that Robert Kennedy's probably the best example of a middle ground individual. Somebody like you said, like he could totally get Republican votes too. And people are like, okay, I like this guy. And ultimately, it's about being middle ground. Just because they agree with your beliefs, and just because Trump is the guy you like, and whatever, doesn't mean that that's the right choice for the country. Doesn't mean it's the right decision for the time. And I think right now we need a mediator role, somebody to really kind of arbitrate some positive conversations and talks, and have a more return to the middle ground, as opposed to being, oh, we're going to drive really heavy in this direction or really heavy in this direction. It's not what the country needs right now. It's only going to cause more anger and frustration with everything. So,
and just last closing thought, if you want to investigate Robert Kennedy, I heard of his, I've heard of him since like COVID came out. He was an outspoken voice during that. And I think many of his opinions were proven right.
Yeah.
But more recently, I heard him on the All In podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And they did like a special interview. It was like 2 hours. It was honestly pretty good. And he's been on a number of podcasts, just talking about the issues, which I love that he's issues based. I love that he can answer questions. And when he does it, one of the best things I saw on the All In podcast was when he didn't know the answer to something, he said he didn't know the answer. He said, I need to do more research on that. You bring up a good point. It's definitely like an important issue that I haven't put enough thought into. And I'm glad he is able to say that. And I think when he is like in the Oval Office with a room of advisors, he's going to make the right decisions. He's going to think about the issues rather than what is going to get him reelected.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. Anyway, this was chapter 5 of Ray Dalio's Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. This is Two Guys, One Book. I'm Johnny.
I'm Ismail Schmanky.
And we'll see you next time.
Adios. I gotta leave.
Sorry, technical difficulties.